The revolver felt cold against Caleb Turner's palm as he stood in the moonlit ranch yard, staring at the silhouette framed in the cookhouse doorway. 3 days ago, he'd hired a cook to save his failing operation. Tonight, he discovered she was harboring secrets that could destroy everything he'd built. The woman who'd transformed his kitchen into the soul of his ranch wasn't who she claimed to be. And the men riding hard toward his property line weren't coming for supper. Caleb had thought love was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. He was about to learn it was the only thing worth dying for. Before we begin Caleb and Lydia's journey through the wild Wyoming territory of 1878, I invite you to stay with us until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these frontier tales travel. Now, let's step back to where it all began. The Wyoming wind carried the scent of sage and disappointment as Caleb Turner surveyed his ranch from the porch of his weathered timber house. 26 years old, owner of 300 acres of stubborn land, and currently watching his life's work crumble because his men couldn't stomach another meal of burnt beans and gristly meat. "Boss, we need to talk." Caleb didn't turn at the sound of his foreman's voice. He knew what was coming. Marcus Webb had been with him since the beginning, one of the few who'd stuck around when things got lean. If Marcus was coming to him with that tone, the situation had moved past serious into critical. "Let me guess," Caleb said, his jaw tight. "Henderson and the Miller brothers are packing up." "Not just them." Marcus climbed the porch steps, his boots heavy with more than just trail dust. "Talked to Dutch this morning. He's had enough too. Says he can't work 14-hour days on food that tastes like the bottom of a boot. And boss, I can't say he's wrong." Caleb's hands gripped the porch railing until his knuckles went white. Since his father's death 2 years ago, he'd been struggling to keep the Turner Ranch alive. The cattle operation was sound, the land was good, and the water rights he held were worth more than gold in this territory. But he couldn't keep men if he couldn't feed them properly. And without men, the ranch would die. "What do you suggest, Marcus?" Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd learned early that showing weakness on the frontier was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. "Same thing I've been suggesting for 3 months now." Marcus pulled a worn piece of paper from his vest pocket. "Hire a real cook, not one of the boys taking turns burning whatever we got. A professional. Someone who knows their way around a kitchen." Caleb finally turned to face his foreman. Marcus was 15 years older, weathered by the frontier in ways that made him look ancient in certain lights. But his eyes were sharp, and Caleb had learned to trust his judgment, even when he didn't want to hear it. "We can't afford a professional cook." "Can't afford not to, boss. You lose those 4 men, you won't have enough hands to run the herd. Come winter, you'll be done." The truth of it sat between them like a stone. Caleb had been doing the math in his head for weeks now, trying to find a way around it. There wasn't one. Pride was a luxury, and he was fresh out of luxuries. "Fine." The word tasted like defeat. "Put the word out. But I want someone cheap, competent, and temporary. Soon as the men are settled, we figure out something else." Marcus's weathered face cracked into something resembling a smile. "Already did. Got a response too. Woman named Lydia Moore, working at the boarding house in Cheyenne. Comes with references, reasonable terms, and she can start immediately." "A woman?" Caleb's eyebrows shot up. "Marcus, this is a working ranch, not a what? A place that needs feeding?" "Boss, I don't care if the cook's a woman, a Chinaman, or a trained bear, long as the food's edible and the men stop complaining." Marcus held up the paper. "She's asking $40 a month, room and board. That's cheaper than what we'd pay a man, and her references say she kept a boarding house kitchen running for 3 years without a single complaint." $40 a month. Caleb ran the numbers. If it kept 4 men from leaving, men he'd have to replace at higher wages if he could find replacements at all. It almost made sense. Almost. "When can she start?" "She's on the stage tomorrow. Should be here by Thursday afternoon." Caleb looked out at his land again, at the ranch that bore his name and carried his father's dreams. Sometimes survival meant swallowing your pride and making decisions you didn't like. Sometimes the frontier taught you that control was an illusion, and the best you could do was manage the chaos. "Fine. But Marcus, make it clear, this is a temporary arrangement. I'm not looking for permanent staff, and I'm definitely not looking for complications." Marcus nodded, but something in his expression suggested he knew better than to believe it. "I'll make it clear, boss. Whatever you say." 3 days later, Caleb was in the south pasture checking fence lines when he heard the rattle of an approaching wagon. He'd forgotten, in the way a man forgets things he doesn't want to think about, that the new cook was arriving today. He'd deliberately made himself scarce, letting Marcus handle the details. It was easier that way, less personal, less connected. But as he rode back toward the ranch buildings, curiosity got the better of him. He needed to see what kind of woman took a job cooking for a dozen rough men in the middle of the Wyoming territory, hours from the nearest town. The wagon was pulled up outside the cookhouse, a squat log building that sat between the bunkhouse and the main house. Caleb had built it himself 3 years ago, back when he'd still had hope that the ranch might grow into something his father would have been proud of. Now it was just another structure that needed more maintenance than he could afford to give it. A woman stood beside the wagon, and Caleb's first thought was that she looked nothing like what he'd expected. Lydia Moore was perhaps 24 or 25, tall and straight-backed in a way that suggested she'd never learned to apologize for taking up space. She wore a simple gray dress, practical and worn but clean, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was angular, striking rather than pretty, with intelligent eyes that were currently assessing the cookhouse with the same critical attention Caleb might give a horse he was considering purchasing. Marcus was helping her unload 2 large trunks from the wagon, and the driver, old Pete from the stage line, was talking at her in that way men talked at women they assumed didn't know anything about anything. "Now you be careful out here, miss. This ain't like town. These ranch boys can be rough, and you're a long way from help if things get difficult." Lydia didn't look at Pete. She kept her attention on the building, on the sagging porch, and the door hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Peterson. I'll manage." Something in her tone, calm, sure, completely unintimidated, made Caleb reassess his initial assumptions. This wasn't some desperate woman taking the first job she could find. This was someone who knew exactly what she was walking into and had chosen it anyway. He dismounted and led his horse toward the group, aware that 3 of his ranch hands had found reasons to be working near the cookhouse. Henderson, supposedly repairing a water trough. Young Billy, suddenly fascinated by a fence post that had been loose for 2 months. Dutch, making a show of organizing tools that hadn't been organized since the previous decade. "Miss Moore." Caleb touched the brim of his hat, keeping his voice neutral. "I'm Caleb Turner. Welcome to the ranch." She turned to face him fully, and Caleb had the distinct impression he was being evaluated just as thoroughly as the cookhouse had been. Her eyes were gray, he noticed, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. "Mr. Turner?" She didn't offer her hand, which he appreciated. Frontier handshakes were a test of strength that usually left everyone uncomfortable. "Thank you for the opportunity. Your foreman has outlined the basic terms. I'd like to see the kitchen before we discuss anything further." Direct. No small talk, no attempts at charm. Caleb found himself respecting that, even as it put him slightly off balance. "Of course. Marcus can show you. I'd prefer if you showed me yourself." She said it simply, matter of fact. "You're the owner. You should know the condition of your facilities." It wasn't a request. Caleb felt his jaw tighten slightly. He wasn't used to being told what to do on his own property, but something about the way she said it made arguing seem petty. "All right then." He gestured toward the cookhouse door. "After you." Marcus caught his eye over Lydia's shoulder, his expression carefully neutral, but Caleb could read the amusement there. His foreman was enjoying this far too much. The cookhouse interior was worse than Caleb remembered. He'd been avoiding this place for months, taking his meals in the main house and pretending he didn't know how bad things had gotten. But walking in behind Lydia, seeing it through her eyes, made the neglect impossible to ignore. The place was filthy. Grease coated every surface, mixed with dust and God knew what else. The large cast iron stove that dominated one wall was crusted with burnt food and ash. The long wooden table where the men ate was scarred and stained, the benches pushed askew. Pots and pans were piled haphazardly in a corner, many of them rusted. The whole place smelled like old smoke, spoiled meat, and failure. Lydia stood in the center of the room, slowly turning in a complete circle. Her expression never changed, no disgust, no dismay, no judgment, just that same calm assessment, like she was looking at a puzzle she needed to solve. How many men? She asked. Counting Marcus and myself, 13, sometimes more during roundup and branding season. She nodded, walked to the stove, ran her finger along the surface, and examined the residue critically. When was this last properly cleaned? Caleb felt heat rise in his chest, an uncomfortable mix of embarrassment and defensive anger. We're a working ranch, Miss Moore. The boys do their best, but I'm not criticizing Mr. Turner. I'm assessing. She moved to the pile of pots, lifted one, examined it, set it down. This isn't my first time walking into a neglected kitchen. I just need to understand the starting point. The matter-of-fact way she said it, without heat or judgment, diffused his defensiveness. She was right, after all. This was neglected. He'd let it become neglected because he'd been focused on everything else: the cattle, the land, the constant struggle to keep the operation running. So, he crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. What's your assessment? It's salvageable. She walked to the storage area, opened several cabinets, examined the sorry state of their provisions. Barely, but salvageable. I'll need supplies, cleaning supplies first, then proper cooking ingredients. I'll make a list. I'll also need 1 full day before I serve a meal. This place needs to be completely emptied and scrubbed before I can work in it. 1 day? Miss Moore, the men need to eat. Then I suggest you arrange alternate meals for tomorrow. Cold cuts, bread from town, whatever you can manage, because I will not serve food from a kitchen in this condition. She turned to face him fully. I assume you hired me because you want things to improve. Improvement requires proper foundation. This is non-negotiable. Caleb stared at her. In his entire life, no one had walked onto his property and immediately started issuing non-negotiable demands. His first instinct was to tell her that if she didn't like the conditions, the stage ran twice a week and she could be on the next one. But then he thought about Henderson and the Miller brothers packing up, about Dutch ready to leave, about the very real possibility that his ranch would fail, not because he couldn't run cattle or manage land, but because he couldn't keep men fed properly. Fine, he said, the word clipped. 1 day. Marcus will take you into town for supplies tomorrow morning. Make your list. Get what you need. But Miss Moore, understand something. This is a working ranch. I don't have time for drama, complications, or demands I can't meet. You cook, you keep the place clean, and you stay out of ranch business. That's the arrangement. Something flickered in her gray eyes. Amusement, maybe, or recognition. Mr. Turner, I have no interest in drama or complications. I'm here to do a job. Keep your men from interfering with my work, and we won't have any problems. The men won't interfere. Then we have an understanding. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Caleb had the unsettling feeling that she could see right through him, through the defensive anger, through the pride, straight down to the desperation he tried so hard to hide. He broke eye contact first, telling himself it was because he had work to do, not because something about her steady gaze made him uncomfortable. Marcus will show you to your quarters. They're attached to the cookhouse, small but private. If you need anything, talk to him. Thank you, Mr. Turner. He left without another word, aware that Henderson, Billy, and Dutch were all suddenly very busy with their respective tasks, trying to look like they hadn't been listening to every word. He could feel their curiosity, their interest, and it annoyed him more than he wanted to admit. That night, Caleb sat on his porch as the sun set over the mountains, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and a knot of tension in his shoulders that wouldn't ease. He told himself his irritation was because he didn't like being pushed around on his own property, that the woman's directness had caught him off guard, and he didn't appreciate it. But the truth, if he was honest with himself, was something else entirely. The truth was that Lydia Moore, with her gray eyes and her non-negotiable demands and her complete lack of intimidation, had walked into his carefully controlled world and immediately disrupted it. She'd looked at his failures, the filthy kitchen, the neglected equipment, and hadn't flinched, hadn't judged him, had simply assessed what needed to be done and started making plans. And something about that directness, that capability, unsettled him in ways he didn't want to examine. She's efficient, I'll give her that, Marcus said, climbing the porch steps with his own glass of whiskey. Got that list done in an hour. Knows exactly what she needs, exactly what it'll cost. Even prioritized it, Essentials first, improvements after. Caleb grunted, staring at the mountains. Boss, this is a good thing. The men are already talking about how things are going to improve. Henderson's even reconsidering his plans to leave. She's temporary, Marcus. Don't let anyone get attached. His foreman was quiet for a long moment. Why temporary? If she's good at the job, why not keep her? Caleb finished his whiskey in one swallow, let the burn settle in his chest. Because this is a working ranch, because complications are the last thing I need, because I hired a cook, not... He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Not what? Just keep things professional. That's all I'm saying. Marcus studied him with those sharp old eyes, and Caleb had the uncomfortable feeling his foreman saw too much, understood too much. Professional, Marcus repeated slowly. Right. Well, I'll make sure to tell Miss Moore to keep things professional, though something tells me she already knows. The next morning, Caleb made sure he was out working the North Range when Marcus took Lydia into town. He told himself it was because he had legitimate work to do, fence lines to check, cattle to count. He didn't need to be involved in kitchen supplies shopping. That was Marcus's job now. But when he rode back in late afternoon and saw the wagon loaded with supplies, saw Lydia directing Marcus and two of the boys on where to put things, saw the efficiency with which she organized the unloading, he felt that same unsettling disruption in his carefully controlled world. She'd changed into work clothes, a plain brown dress with the sleeves rolled up, an apron tied around her waist. Her hair was still pulled back severely, but small strands had escaped, softening the angles of her face. She moved with purpose, like someone who'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly what every motion should accomplish. "The stove in there," she was saying to Billy, who'd been enlisted to help. "Carefully, please. That one's cast iron and it's fragile over there next to the others." Billy nodded, looking slightly dazed. Caleb couldn't tell if it was from the work or from the fact that Lydia Moore had a way of speaking that made you want to do exactly what she said without questioning it. "Marcus, the flour sacks can go in the storage room. They need to be up off the floor. Use those wooden pallets. And someone needs to check those for mice first. I won't have my supplies contaminated." "Yes, ma'am." Caleb dismounted, tied his horse, and watched the operation from a distance. Lydia hadn't noticed him yet, or if she had, she gave no indication. She was completely focused on the task at hand, checking items off her list, organizing supplies with a precision that bordered on military efficiency. "Boss?" Henderson appeared at his elbow, watching the same scene. "She's something, ain't she?" Caleb shot him a warning look. "She's the cook, Henderson. That's all." But Henderson just grinned, the first real smile Caleb had seen on the man's face in months. "Sure, boss. Whatever you say. But I'll tell you this much. I'm not going anywhere now. Not if she's half as good at cooking as she is at organizing. This place already looks different." And it did. It was subtle, but Caleb could feel it. There was an energy around the cookhouse that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose. The men moved differently, worked more willingly. Even the building itself seemed to stand straighter, as if it knew something was about to change. Lydia finally looked up, caught his eye across the yard, and gave him a brief nod. Not friendly, not unfriendly, just an acknowledgement between two professionals. "I'm doing my job. You do yours." Caleb nodded back and turned away, heading for the main house. He had paperwork to catch up on, books to balance, a dozen tasks that required his attention. He didn't have time to stand around watching the new cook organize supplies, but he was acutely aware, in a way that annoyed him, that for the first time in months, something in his carefully controlled world felt like it might be improving. That evening, Lydia appeared at the main house just as the sun was setting. Caleb was in his small office, staring at columns of numbers that refused to make sense when he heard the knock. "Come in." She opened the door, still wearing the work dress and apron, though she'd wiped most of the dust off. She held a piece of paper in her hand. "Mr. Turner, I need to discuss the kitchen budget with you." Caleb leaned back in his chair, suddenly tired. "I thought we settled that this morning." "We settled the immediate supplies. I need to discuss the ongoing budget. How much per month you're allocating for food, ingredients, supplies." He hadn't thought that far ahead, and his expression must have shown it, because she continued without waiting for him to answer. Right now, based on what I found in your storage and what Marcus told me about your usual provisions, you're spending approximately $60 a month to feed 13 men poorly. I can feed them well for $75 a month, including my salary. That's about 70 cents per man per day, reasonable for the quality you'll be getting. Caleb did the math in his head. $15 more per month, against losing 4 men who'd cost him far more than that to replace. Can you prove it? That the quality will be worth it? Something that might have been a smile flickered across her face. Tomorrow evening, come to the cookhouse for supper. Bring Marcus. Judge for yourself. Tomorrow? I thought you needed a full day just to clean. I work fast, Mr. Turner, and I keep my commitments. She left before he could respond, closing the door softly behind her. Caleb stared at the empty doorway, then down at the numbers on his desk that still didn't make sense. He realized, with some surprise, that he was actually curious about tomorrow's supper. Not because he cared particularly about food. He'd spent enough years eating trail rations and whatever could be cooked over a campfire that his standards weren't high, but because Lydia Moore had made a promise, and he wanted to see if she could keep it. The next evening, when Caleb and Marcus walked into the cookhouse, he almost didn't recognize the place. The transformation was stunning. The entire building had been scrubbed clean, walls, floor, ceiling, every surface. The stove gleamed, properly blacked and polished. The long table had been sanded down and oiled, the benches straightened and reinforced. Pots and pans hung in neat rows, organized by size. The windows, which Caleb hadn't even realized were so dirty, now let in the evening light in golden streams. But it was the smell that really got him, the rich, complex aroma of actual cooking. Meat, herbs, baking bread. His mouth started watering before he even saw the food. The men were already seated, and Caleb noticed immediately that they'd cleaned up before coming to eat. Washed faces, combed hair, fresh shirts. They sat straighter, spoke quieter. The cookhouse had become, overnight, a place that commanded a certain respect. Lydia emerged from the kitchen area carrying a large pot, Marcus rushing to help her. She'd changed again, wearing a clean dress with a fresh white apron. Her hair was still pulled back, but the severity was softened by the warm light and the faint flush of heat from cooking. "Gentlemen," she said simply, and started serving. Roasted beef, tender, and seasoned with herbs. Caleb couldn't identify, but that made his senses sing. Potatoes, actually flavored with butter and salt. Fresh bread, warm and soft. Vegetables cooked properly, not boiled to mush. And for dessert, dried apple pie with a crust that flaked perfectly under the fork. The men ate in near silence, too busy enjoying the meal to waste time on talking. Caleb watched Henderson close his eyes after the first bite, saw Dutch grin wider than he had in months, noticed young Billy going back for seconds and thirds. Marcus caught his eye across the table, raised his eyebrows in an expression that clearly said, "Told you so." Caleb had to admit it. The food was extraordinary. Not fancy, not complicated, but cooked with a skill and care that transformed simple frontier ingredients into something that felt like civilization. Like home. When the meal was finished and the men filed out, touching their hats to Lydia and thanking her with genuine appreciation, Caleb remained behind. He helped Marcus carry dishes to the kitchen area, aware that Lydia was watching them with mild surprise. "You don't have to do that, Mr. Turner." "My mother raised me with manners, Miss Moore. When someone cooks you the best meal you've had in 2 years, the least you can do is help clean up." Was that another almost smile? It disappeared too quickly for him to be sure. "The budget increase," Caleb said, setting down a stack of plates. "You've got it. $75 a month, as you suggested. I assume the books will prove the investment's worth it." "They will." She started washing dishes with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. "I keep detailed records. You'll see exactly where every dollar goes." The men seem happy. Fed men usually are. Caleb leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You've done this before. This isn't your first time walking into chaos and creating order." She didn't answer immediately, her hands steady in the wash water. "I've managed kitchens since I was 16, Mr. Turner. Boarding houses, hotels, one ranch in Colorado. Chaos is relative. This wasn't even the worst I've seen." "Why did you leave Colorado?" Her hands paused, just for a moment, then resumed their rhythm. The same reason most people leave places. It was time for something new. It was an evasion, polite but firm, and Caleb recognized it for what it was, a boundary being established. I'll do my job. You don't need to know my history. Fair enough. He didn't particularly want to share his history either. Well, whatever your reasons, you've made an immediate difference. The men are already talking about it. You've bought me time, Miss Moore. I appreciate that. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Caleb felt that same unsettling sensation of being seen too clearly. Time for what? To make the ranch work, to prove it can succeed. And if it does? If the ranch succeeds, what then? It was a strange question, and Caleb wasn't sure how to answer it. He'd been so focused on survival, on just making it through each season, that he hadn't thought much about what success would actually look like. Then I build something lasting, he said finally, something worth passing on. She nodded slowly, turned back to the dishes. That's a good answer, Mr. Turner. Better than most men give. He wanted to ask what she meant by that, but Marcus was returning from taking leftover scraps to the pigs, and the moment passed. Caleb excused himself, heading back to the main house with the taste of good food still on his tongue and the scent of herbs and baking bread clinging to his clothes. Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb found himself falling into a new rhythm. The cookhouse became the heartbeat of the ranch, the place where men gathered not just for meals but for conversation, for planning, for the small moments of community that made isolation bearable. Lydia ruled it with quiet efficiency, never raising her voice, but somehow always maintaining perfect control. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, served lunch at noon, and had supper ready when the men came in from their work. Between meals, she kept the place spotless, did inventory, planned menus, and somehow found time to improve small details. A shelf added here, a window repaired there, curtains sewn from flour sacks that made the space feel less institutional. And through it all, she maintained that same professional distance. Friendly, but not familiar with the men. Respectful, but not deferential. She was the cook, they were the ranch hands, and everyone understood their roles. Everyone except Caleb. He found himself taking meals in the cookhouse more often, telling himself it was to check on morale, to make sure the men were satisfied. But the truth, which he avoided examining too closely, was that he was drawn to the place, to the warmth, the order, the sense of purpose that radiated from it. To her. He noticed things he shouldn't notice. The way she moved through the kitchen with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. The way she listened when the men talked, really listened, remembering details about their lives. The way she handled conflict. Billy and one of the Miller brothers got into an argument over a card game, and she'd separated them with a few quiet words that left both men sheepish and apologetic. He noticed that she rose before everyone else and went to bed after everyone else, that she kept a small herb garden behind the cookhouse, tending it in the few minutes of free time she had, that sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her expression would grow distant, like she was remembering something sad. And he noticed that whenever he entered the cookhouse, she became just slightly more formal, more distant, like she was putting up walls he hadn't realized had started to come down around the others. It bothered him more than it should have. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, Caleb was doing a final check of the barn when he saw light still burning in the cookhouse. It was past 10, well after Lydia usually finished for the day. Curious, and telling himself it was concern for his employee rather than anything else, he walked over. She was sitting at the long table, a count book spread in front of her, making notes by lamplight. She'd let her hair down, and it fell in a dark wave past her shoulders, softening her features in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face before she composed herself. Mr. Turner, is something wrong? I could ask you the same thing. It's late. I'm updating the kitchen accounts. I prefer to do it when I won't be interrupted. Caleb pulled out a chair across from her, sat down without asking permission. Show me. She hesitated, then turned the book around. As promised, her records were meticulous. Every purchase, every expense, tracked to the penny. Notes on prices, on quality, on what worked and what didn't. It was the kind of detailed bookkeeping that Caleb aspired to but never quite managed with his own ranch accounts. This is impressive. It's necessary. If you don't track expenses carefully, costs spiral quickly. Where did you learn this level of detail? Again, that pause, that sense of walls going up. Experience, trial and error, making mistakes and learning from them. Caleb leaned back, studied her in the lamplight. "Miss Moore, can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Whether I answer depends on the question." "Why are you really here? A woman with your skills could find work anywhere. Better pay, easier conditions. Why an isolated ranch in Wyoming territory?" She closed the account book slowly, her hands resting on the leather cover. For a long moment, she didn't answer, and Caleb thought she might refuse entirely. Then she looked up, met his eyes, and something in her expression shifted. "For the same reason you're here, Mr. Turner, because sometimes you need distance to figure out who you are. Because sometimes the frontier is the only place that lets you start over without questions." She paused. "And because I'm good at what I do, and I wanted a place where that would matter more than anything else." It was the most personal thing she'd shared since arriving, and the honesty of it struck something deep in Caleb's chest. He understood that need for distance, for reinvention. He'd come to Wyoming for similar reasons after his father's death, running from expectations and disappointments back east. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "And for what it's worth, it does matter. What you've done here, it's more than I hoped for." She nodded, but didn't smile. "Then I'm doing my job." "You're doing more than your job, and you know it." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Lydia's eyes widened slightly, and Caleb realized he'd crossed a line he'd promised himself he wouldn't cross. He stood abruptly. "I should let you finish. Early morning tomorrow." "Mr. Turner," he paused at the door, looked back. In the lamplight, with her hair down and her defenses momentarily lowered, Lydia Moore looked like someone who carried burdens she never spoke about. Someone who'd learned to be strong because no one had given her any other choice. Someone he recognized because he saw the same thing in himself every morning in the mirror. "Get some rest, Miss Moore. The books can wait until tomorrow." He left before she could respond, walking back to the main house through the cool night air, trying to ignore the fact that something had just shifted between them. Something he told Marcus to prevent, told himself wouldn't happen. In his office, Caleb poured himself a whiskey and stared at his own account books without really seeing them. He'd hired a cook to save his ranch, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. But as he sat alone in the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lydia Moore was going to complicate his life in ways he hadn't anticipated and definitely hadn't planned for. And the most unsettling part was that he wasn't entirely sure he minded. The transformation of the Turner Ranch continued through the spring months like water changing the shape of stone, slowly, inevitably, permanently. What Caleb had convinced himself would be a temporary arrangement began to feel like something that had always existed, as if the ranch had been incomplete before and was only now finding its proper form. The cookhouse became more than just a place to eat. It became the soul of the operation. Men who'd once wolfed down meals standing up now sat at Lydia's table with something resembling manners. They washed before eating, removed their hats, said please and thank you. Dutch, who'd been the worst offender when it came to crude jokes and rougher behavior, actually apologized once when his language got too colorful in Lydia's presence. She'd simply looked at him, said nothing, and somehow that silence was more effective than any reprimand could have been. "She's got you all acting like choir boys," Caleb observed one morning, watching Henderson actually help clear plates after breakfast. Henderson grinned, not even slightly embarrassed. "Better than acting like the animals we were before, boss. Besides, a man respects a woman who can cook like that. It's only natural." Natural. Caleb wasn't sure anything about the situation felt natural anymore. The careful distance he'd tried to maintain was eroding without him quite knowing how or when it had started. It happened in small moments. Passing Lydia in the yard and exchanging brief words about supplies or weather. Finding her at dawn tending her herb garden and staying to help pull weeds while they talked about nothing important. Discovering she had opinions about everything from cattle breeding to territorial politics, and that those opinions were usually better informed than his own. "You read a lot," he said one evening, noticing a stack of newspapers by her small room off the kitchen. "When I can get them. Knowledge is currency, Mr. Turner. The more you know about the world, the better equipped you are to navigate it." She was darning socks, not her own, but the ranch hands. Apparently several of them had discovered that leaving items in need of repair near the cookhouse door resulted in those items being mysteriously fixed. Caleb hadn't asked her to take on that additional responsibility. She'd simply done it. You're doing more than I hired you for, he said, gesturing at the socks. A cook manages more than just food. I manage morale. Happy men work harder, stay longer, cause less trouble. If fixing a few socks accomplishes that, it's worth my time. Always practical. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. It was one of the things that made her so effective and so unsettling. Caleb was used to being the one who planned, who strategized, who saw the bigger picture. Having someone else do it, someone who operated with even more efficiency than he did, shifted the balance of power in ways he couldn't quite define. "Did you learn that in Colorado?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. He'd been trying to respect her boundaries, to not pry into the past she clearly didn't want to discuss. But this time, she didn't shut down completely. Her hands kept moving, needle flashing in the lamplight. "Colorado and other places. I've worked in enough kitchens to understand how operations function. The food is important, but the atmosphere matters just as much. Men need to feel cared for, not coddled, but cared for. There's a difference. And you're good at that, making people feel cared for." She looked up then, something sharp and sad in her gray eyes. "I'm good at my job, Mr. Turner. Let's not romanticize it beyond that." The words created distance, but they also revealed something, a defensiveness that suggested she'd been romanticized before, that men had mistaken professional care for personal interest. Caleb filed that information away, added it to the incomplete picture he was building of who Lydia Moore really was. "Fair enough," he said, and left her to her work. But the conversation stayed with him, nagging at his thoughts as he did his evening rounds. The boundary between professional and personal was becoming harder to maintain, and he wasn't entirely sure who was responsible for the erosion, her, him, or simply the inevitable intimacy that came from sharing space day after day. Marcus noticed, of course. His foreman noticed everything. "You're spending a lot of time at the cookhouse lately," Marcus observed one afternoon as they rode fence lines together. "I'm checking on ranch operations. The kitchen is part of that." "Uh-huh. And the fact that Miss Moore is intelligent, capable, and easier on the eyes than the rest of us has nothing to do with it?" Caleb shot him a warning look. "She's an employee, Marcus, that's all. Boss, I've known you since you were 24 years old, still wet behind the ears and pretending you knew how to run a ranch. You've never been good at lying, and you're especially bad at lying to yourself." "I'm not—" Caleb stopped, forced himself to take a breath. "Even if you were right, which you're not, it would be a complication I can't afford. This ranch is barely stable. The last thing I need is to get tangled up in something that could jeopardize what we've built." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know what I think? I think you're so afraid of losing what you've got that you won't let yourself want anything more. Your daddy was like that too toward the end, so focused on holding on that he forgot to actually live." The comparison stung because it was accurate. Caleb had watched his father slowly strangle the joy out of his own life through fear and control, watched him die alone and bitter, despite owning 300 acres of good land. It was a lesson Caleb had sworn he'd learned from, but apparently not well enough. "This conversation is done, Marcus." "All right, boss. But just so you know, the men like her. Really like her. Henderson told me yesterday that he's planning to stay on permanent. Said he can't imagine working anywhere else now. That's because of her. Because she made this place feel like more than just a job." Caleb knew Marcus was right, but he couldn't acknowledge it. To acknowledge it would be to admit that Lydia had become essential, and essential things could be lost. Better to maintain the fiction that she was temporary, replaceable, just another hired hand, even if he no longer believed it himself. The first real crack in his careful control came on a Tuesday afternoon in late May. Caleb was in the barn working on a problematic wagon wheel when he heard raised voices from the direction of the cookhouse. He dropped his tools immediately, something cold settling in his stomach. Lydia didn't raise her voice. The fact that someone else was meant trouble. He reached the cookhouse to find a situation that made his blood pressure spike instantly. A man he didn't recognize, well-dressed, riding an expensive horse, carrying himself with the particular arrogance that came from money and power, was standing too close to Lydia, his posture aggressive and threatening. "Told you before, Lydia. You can't just run away and expect there to be no consequences." Lydia's face was pale but composed, her voice level despite the tension radiating from her body. "I'm not running away, Mr. Caldwell. I'm living my life. There's a difference. Caldwell. The name struck a chord in Caleb's memory. He'd heard it before. A mining operation north of here owned by a man with a reputation for getting what he wanted, regardless of who got hurt in the process. Caleb stepped forward, inserting himself between them with deliberate casualness. Is there a problem here? The man, Evan Caldwell, Caleb assumed, turned to assess him with cold calculation. He was perhaps 40, handsome in a polished way that suggested he'd never done a day's hard labor in his life. His suit probably cost more than Caleb earned in 6 months. No problem, just having a conversation with an old acquaintance. Doesn't look like a friendly conversation. That's because it's none of your business, rancher. Caldwell's tone was dismissive, the way rich men talk to those they considered beneath them. This is between me and Miss Moore. Miss Moore works for me. That makes it my business. Lydia spoke before Caldwell could respond. Mr. Turner, I can handle this. But Caleb noticed her hands were clenched at her sides, her breathing too controlled. Whatever history existed between her and Caldwell, it wasn't good. I'm sure you can, Caleb said, keeping his eyes on Caldwell, but you don't have to. So I'll ask again, is there a problem here? Caldwell studied him for a long moment, then laughed, a sound without humor. Ah, I see. You've got yourself a protector now, Lydia. How quickly you move on. Get off my property, Caleb said quietly. The words were soft, but the threat underneath was clear. Your property? Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Turner Ranch. I've heard about you. Struggling operation, barely making payments, one bad season away from foreclosure. You're in no position to make demands of anyone. The accuracy of the assessment hit harder than Caleb wanted to admit, but he didn't let it show. Nevertheless, this is my land. You're not welcome on it. Leave. Marcus had appeared from somewhere, along with Henderson and Dutch. They didn't say anything, just took up positions that made it clear Caldwell was outnumbered. Whatever business he'd had with Lydia, it wasn't going to be conducted here. Not like this. Caldwell's expression darkened, but he was smart enough to recognize when a situation had turned against him. He stepped back, adjusted his jacket, and gave Lydia a look that promised the conversation wasn't over. We're not done, Lydia. Your family's situation hasn't changed. You know where to find me when you're ready to be reasonable. He mounted his horse with practiced ease and rode off, leaving a tension in the air that felt like the aftermath of a storm. Caleb turned to Lydia. Her face was still pale, but her composure had returned, walls slamming back into place so fast he almost heard them. Thank you, Mr. Turner. That wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it. Who is he? Someone from before. It's not relevant to my work here. Like hell, it's not relevant. He threatened you. He threatened my family, not me. There's a difference. She brushed past him toward the cookhouse, her posture rigid. I need to start lunch preparations. Caleb caught her arm gently, felt her flinch at the contact. He released her immediately, but didn't step back. Lydia, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Turner. Her voice was sharp now, defensive. You hired me to cook. That's the extent of our arrangement. My personal problems are exactly that, personal. Not when they show up on my ranch. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Caleb saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Fear, carefully controlled but definitely present. Whatever Evan Caldwell represented, it was serious enough to shake the unshakable Lydia Moore. I'll handle it, she said quietly. I always do. She went inside before he could respond, leaving Caleb standing in the yard with Marcus and the others. That's Evan Caldwell, Marcus said grimly. Owns the Caldwell Mining Company, operations all through the territory. Not a man you want as an enemy. Too late for that, apparently. Henderson spat into the dirt. Man's got a reputation. Takes what he wants. Doesn't care who gets hurt. If he's got business with Miss Moore, it ain't the good kind. Caleb felt something cold and angry settling in his chest. He told himself Lydia was just an employee, that her personal life was none of his concern. But watching her face when Caldwell had threatened her family, seeing the fear she'd tried so hard to hide, it made those careful boundaries feel like the lies they'd probably always been. Find out what you can, he told Marcus. Quietly. I want to know what kind of trouble we're dealing with. We, Marcus raised an eyebrow. Boss, if Caldwell's involved, This could get complicated. You sure you want to chit? Just find out what you can. That evening, Caleb skipped dinner in the cookhouse. He told himself it was because he had work to do, but the truth was he needed distance, needed to think. The appearance of Evan Caldwell had changed something, forced him to confront questions he'd been avoiding. What was Lydia running from? What hold did Caldwell have over her family? And why did the thought of her being threatened make Caleb want to do something stupid and violent? He was still wrestling with those questions when Lydia knocked on his door near midnight. "It's open." She entered hesitantly, still wearing her work clothes, her hair starting to escape its severe bun. She looked exhausted and young, and nothing like the confident woman who ruled the cookhouse. "I owe you an explanation," she said without preamble. "You don't owe me anything." "I do, actually. Caldwell showing up here affects your ranch, your men. You have a right to know what you're dealing with." Caleb gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Then tell me." She sat, folded her hands in her lap, and took a breath. "I worked in Colorado for 3 years at a ranch near Caldwell's mining operations. My parents own a small farm about 20 miles from there. Good land, water rights, but small. Nothing significant, except Caldwell wanted it. For expansion? For water access. His mining operations use enormous amounts of water, and my parents' property controls a creek that feeds into his main source. He offered to buy them out. They refused, so he started applying pressure." Caleb had heard stories like this before. Rich men who wanted something and didn't care what they had to do to get it. What kind of pressure? The usual: threats, intimidation, mysterious accidents. Their barn burned down, fences got cut, water got diverted. Nothing they could prove, but everyone knew who was behind it. "And where do you fit into this?" Her laugh was bitter. "I'm the leverage. Caldwell approached me 6 months ago with an offer. I could convince my parents to sell, or he'd make sure I lost my job and couldn't find another one in the territory. When I refused, he started spreading rumors about my character, my reputation, made it impossible for me to stay in Colorado." The pieces were falling into place, and Caleb didn't like the picture they formed. "So you came to Wyoming?" "I came to Wyoming, thought distance would solve the problem. But Caldwell's operations are expanding north. He found me, and now he's threatening my parents again, saying if I don't come back and help convince them to sell, things will get worse." "Why doesn't your family just go to the law?" "Because Caldwell owns the law in that region. The sheriff, the judges, half the territorial government. My father tried. Got told that unless he had proof, real, documented proof, there was nothing they could do. And proof mysteriously disappears around Caldwell." Caleb leaned back in his chair, processing it all. A powerful man using his influence to steal land, threatening families, destroying lives. It made him furious in a way that surprised him with its intensity. "What does he want from you specifically?" "He wants me to go back to Colorado, talk to my parents, convince them to sell. He thinks because I'm their daughter, I have influence. He's offering money, a percentage of the sale that would set me up for life." "And if you refuse?" Her hands tightened in her lap. "He'll destroy my family, drive them off their land. Maybe worse. Evan Caldwell doesn't make empty threats." The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on Caleb's desk. He studied Lydia's face, saw the weight she'd been carrying alone, the impossible choice she'd been trying to navigate without help. "You're not going back to Colorado," he said finally. She looked up sharply. "Mr. Turner?" "Caleb. And I mean it. You're not going back. We'll figure out another way." "There is no other way. I've been trying to find one for 6 months." "Then you haven't been trying with the right people." He stood, paced to the window, looked out at his land. "Caldwell thinks he can intimidate everyone because most people can't fight back. But he made a mistake coming here. This is my property. You work for me. That makes you my responsibility. I know what you're going to say, that you're not my responsibility, but Lydia, you are. Not because I hired you, but because—" He stopped, the words he'd been avoiding for weeks suddenly demanding to be said. "Because I care what happens to you. Because this ranch has become something more than just a business since you arrived. Because when I saw Caldwell threatening you, I wanted to put him on the ground, and that's not a professional reaction." The silence that followed was heavy with everything they'd both been refusing to acknowledge. Lydia stood slowly, her gray eyes wide. Caleb, you can't fight Evan Caldwell. He has money, influence, power. You're barely holding this ranch together. Getting involved in my problems could destroy everything you've built. Maybe, but not getting involved would mean letting him hurt you and your family. And I can't do that. I won't. She crossed to where he stood, and for the first time since he'd known her, Lydia looked uncertain, vulnerable. The armor she wore so carefully was cracking. Why? She asked softly. Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? Because I know you better than you think. Because every morning I wake up looking forward to seeing you in the cookhouse. Because the sound of your laugh, rare as it is, makes my whole day better. Because you've taken my lonely ranch and turned it into a home. But he couldn't say any of that, not yet. Not when the words would complicate an already impossible situation. Because it's the right thing to do, he said instead. And because you'd do the same for me. She held his gaze for a long moment, and Caleb saw the exact instant she made her decision. To trust him, to let someone else carry part of the burden she'd been shouldering alone. Okay, she said. Okay. But Caleb, you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Caldwell doesn't lose. He'll come after you, after the ranch, after everything. Then he'll learn what it means to fight someone with nothing left to lose. Over the next week, Caleb began gathering information with a quiet intensity that would have impressed his father. He sent telegrams to contacts in Denver and Cheyenne, asked questions of travelers passing through, and slowly built a picture of Evan Caldwell's operations. What he found wasn't encouraging. Caldwell was exactly as advertised, ruthless, connected, willing to use any means necessary to expand his mining empire. But Caleb also found something interesting: patterns of behavior, repeated tactics, and a handful of people Caldwell had pushed too far. There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, Marcus reported one evening, having just returned from a 2-day trip to the territorial capital. Name's Robert Chen, Chinese fellow, brilliant mind, and he's been trying to build a case against Caldwell for years. Says if he had the right witnesses, the right documentation, he could bring the whole operation down. What kind of documentation? Proof of intimidation, illegal land seizures, bribery? The problem is everyone's too scared to testify. Caldwell's made examples of people who've tried to oppose him. Caleb thought about Lydia's parents, about their burned barn and cut fences, about other families probably suffering the same treatment, too frightened or powerless to fight back. Set up a meeting with Chen. I want to know exactly what he needs. Boss, are you sure about this? Getting involved in a legal fight with a man like Caldwell? I'm sure. He wasn't, actually. He was terrified. But sometimes being terrified was less important than being right. Lydia watched these preparations with a mixture of hope and fear. She helped where she could, providing details about Caldwell's operations, names of other families who'd been targeted. But Caleb could see the worry in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. One evening, as she was closing up the cookhouse, he found her standing in the herb garden, staring at nothing. You're thinking too hard, he said, joining her in the twilight. I'm thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, about what happens if Caldwell wins, if he destroys you because of me. He won't win. You can't know that. No, but I can believe it, and sometimes belief is enough. But she turned to face him, and in the fading light she looked almost ethereal, real, but not quite, like something that might disappear if he reached for her too quickly. In Colorado, I learned to stop believing in things, she said quietly. Stop believing in justice, in fairness, in people helping each other without wanting something in return. I learned that the world was hard, and you survived by being harder. And now? Now I'm starting to remember that maybe the world doesn't have to be that way, that maybe there are still people worth believing in. She paused. People like you. The words hung between them, fragile and significant. Caleb knew he should step back, maintain the professional distance they'd both been clinging to. But he'd spent weeks watching her transform his ranch, months discovering the remarkable woman beneath the capable cook, and he was tired of pretending he didn't feel something profound shifting in his chest every time she was near. Lydia, he said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. When this is over, when we've dealt with Caldwell and your family is safe, I need to tell you something.
Something I should probably tell you now, but the timing's wrong, and you've got enough to worry about." She understood. He could see it in her eyes, the knowledge of what he wasn't saying, the matching awareness of something growing between them that neither had planned for. "After," she agreed. "We'll talk after." But she moved closer, just a step, and her hand found his in the gathering dark. They stood that way for a long moment, not speaking, just existing together in the space between what was and what might be. Then Marcus called from the barn about a fence problem, and the moment broke. Lydia withdrew her hand, stepped back into her professional armor, and returned to the cookhouse without looking back. Caleb watched her go, knowing with absolute certainty that everything had changed. He'd hired a cook to save his ranch, told himself it was temporary, promised he wouldn't get attached. He'd failed spectacularly on all counts. And as he walked back to the main house under a sky full of stars, Caleb realized he didn't regret it. Not one bit. Whatever happened with Caldwell, whatever price he had to pay for standing up to a man with more money and power, it was worth it. Because Lydia Moore had walked into his carefully controlled world and shown him that some things mattered more than control, more than fear, more than the protective walls he'd built around his heart. Some things were worth fighting for. And she was one of them. The meeting with Robert Chen changed everything. Caleb rode into Cheyenne on a Thursday morning with Marcus beside him and a knot of determination in his chest that felt like steel. The territorial capital bustled with the energy of progress. New buildings rising alongside old ones, telegraph wires stringing between posts like spiderwebs, the railroad bringing people and possibility from the east. It was the kind of place that made a man feel small and significant all at once. Chen's office occupied the second floor of a modest building near the courthouse. The sign on the door read, "Robert Chen, Attorney at Law," in simple black letters that suggested competence rather than flash. Caleb appreciated that. He'd had enough of flash from men like Evan Caldwell. The lawyer who greeted them was younger than Caleb expected, perhaps 35, with keen eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the careful bearing of someone who'd learned to navigate a world that didn't always welcome him. His handshake was firm, his assessment quick and thorough. "Mr. Turner, Mr. Webb, thank you for coming. Please, sit." The office was neat but crowded with law books, files stacked with military precision, and a large map of the Wyoming territory marked with pins in various colors. Caleb noticed several pins clustered around the area where Caldwell operated his mining interests. "I assume Marcus told you what this is about," Caleb said, declining small talk. He mentioned Evan Caldwell and a situation involving intimidation and land seizure. "I've been waiting years for someone to walk through that door with real evidence against that man." Chen's expression was neutral, but something fierce flickered in his eyes. "Tell me everything." So Caleb did. He laid out Lydia's story, her family's situation, the systematic pressure Caldwell had applied. He described the threats, the burned barn, the rumors designed to destroy her livelihood. As he spoke, Chen took notes with precise strokes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed a mind trained to see patterns others might miss. "And you're willing to stand witness to these events?" Chen asked when Caleb finished. "I witnessed him threatening her on my property. That's documented fact." "Threats alone won't be enough. Caldwell's lawyers will argue it was a civil conversation, that you misunderstood the context. We need more. We need proof of a pattern, documentation, multiple witnesses, evidence of illegal activity that can't be explained away." Marcus leaned forward. "What exactly are we talking about here?" Chen stood, walked to his map, gestured at the colored pins. "Red marks are families Caldwell has successfully driven off their land in the past 5 years. Yellow are families currently under pressure. Green are properties he's acquired through what he claims are legitimate sales. Notice anything?" Caleb studied the map, saw it immediately. They all control water access. "Exactly. Caldwell's mining operations require massive amounts of water. He's been systematically acquiring control of water rights throughout the region, and he doesn't care how he does it. The problem is proving illegal activity. He's careful, uses intermediaries, makes sure nothing traces directly back to him." "But you said if you had the right witnesses." "I said if I had witnesses willing to testify and evidence that could withstand scrutiny in court. Most of these families are terrified.
The ones who did speak up either disappeared, had their testimony discredited, or mysteriously changed their minds before trial. Chen's voice was grim. Caldwell owns the sheriff in 3 counties. He has judges on his payroll. Fighting him means fighting an entire corrupt system. The scope of it was staggering. Caleb had known Caldwell was powerful, but understanding the full extent of that power made his earlier confidence feel naive.
"So what do we do?" he asked quietly. Chen returned to his desk, pulled out a thick file. "We build an ironclad case. We find every family he's hurt, document every incident, establish a pattern so overwhelming that even corrupt officials can't ignore it. And we do it carefully, because the moment Caldwell realizes what we're planning, he'll come after all of us. He's already coming after us. He knows where Lydia is. It's only a matter of time before he escalates. Then we need to move faster than him." Chen opened the file, revealing pages of names, dates, incidents. "I've been collecting information for 3 years. But information without witnesses is just speculation. If you can convince even 3 or 4 families to testify, if we can document current harassment that I can verify independently, we might have enough to bring charges." Marcus whistled low. "That's asking people to put themselves in Caldwell's crosshairs." "I know.
But sometimes courage is the only currency worth anything." Chen looked directly at Caleb. "The question is, are you prepared for what this will cost? Caldwell will retaliate. He'll go after your ranch, your reputation, everything you've built. He'll make you regret ever getting involved." Caleb thought about Lydia standing in the herb garden, admitting she'd stopped believing in justice. Thought about her parents losing everything they'd worked for. Thought about all the other families marked on that map, suffering in silence because no one would stand up. "I'm prepared," he said. "Tell me what you need." Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb's ranch became a different kind of operation. While the men continued their regular work, cattle needed tending regardless of human drama, Caleb threw himself into building the case against Caldwell with an intensity that surprised even himself. He rode out to neighboring properties, talked to families who'd had dealings with Caldwell's mining interests. Some doors closed in his face the moment he mentioned the name. Others opened cautiously, and he heard stories that made his blood boil. Children threatened on their way to school, livestock mysteriously poisoned, wells contaminated with mining runoff. "He offered my husband a job," one woman told him, her hands shaking as she poured coffee in her modest kitchen. "Said if we sold our land, he'd give Tom work at good wages. When we refused, Tom had an accident at the mill, broke his leg in 3 places. The mill owner said it was Tom's fault, carelessness, but everyone knew." "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Caleb asked gently. The woman's face went pale. "Testify? Against Evan Caldwell? Mister, I've got 3 children to feed and a husband who can barely walk. I can't afford to make an enemy like that." It was the same answer everywhere. Fear was Caldwell's most effective weapon, and he wielded it with precision. But Caleb kept pushing, kept asking, kept documenting. And slowly, he found people who'd been pushed far enough that fear had transformed into something harder, into anger, into the willingness to fight back. A rancher named James Whitmore, whose daughter had been run out of town by Caldwell's rumors. A farmer named Sarah Chen, Robert's cousin, whose irrigation system had been sabotaged 3 times. A shopkeeper who'd refused to sell supplies to Caldwell's operation and found himself mysteriously unable to receive new inventory. One by one, Caleb collected their stories, their documentation, their willingness to stand witness. And one by one, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But through it all, he was acutely aware of Lydia watching from the cookhouse, her worry a palpable presence, even when she wasn't speaking it aloud. She never asked him to stop, never suggested he was risking too much. But he saw it in her eyes every time he returned from another meeting, another conversation with Chen, another step deeper into a fight that could destroy everything he'd built. "You're exhausted," she said one evening, finding him in his office long after midnight, paperwork spread across his desk like a battle map. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been working yourself into the ground for 2 weeks." She set down a plate of food, the dinner he'd missed again. "Eat something. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Caleb looked at the food, realized he couldn't remember his last proper meal. "You don't have to take care of me, Lydia.
Someone has to. You're certainly not taking care of yourself. She moved around his office with that same efficiency she brought to everything, straightening papers, adjusting the lamp to cast better light, creating order from chaos. Caleb watched her, felt something in his chest tighten painfully. I got 3 more families to agree to testify, he said. Chen thinks we almost have enough. Her hand stilled on a stack of documents. Almost enough to what? To bring formal charges, to force an investigation that can't be buried or bought off. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes. Chen's working with a federal prosecutor who owes him a favor. If we can present enough evidence, they'll have to act. And then Caldwell will know. He'll know exactly who's behind it. He already knows. The question is whether we move fast enough to stop him before he destroys everything we've worked for. Lydia sat down in the chair across from him, her gray eyes reflecting the lamplight. Caleb, I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear me. Something in her tone made him straighten, give her his full attention. You've risked so much for my family, for people you don't even know. And I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express.
But I need you to understand that if this goes wrong, if Caldwell wins, I'll never forgive myself for bringing this trouble to your door.
Lydia, let me finish. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched in her lap. I came here to escape my problems, not to dump them on someone else. I thought distance would be enough. I was wrong, and now you're paying the price for my mistakes. Caleb stood, moved around the desk, and did something he'd been restraining himself from doing for weeks. He took her hands in his, pulled her to her feet so they stood face to face in the lamplight. Listen to me carefully. This isn't about your mistakes. This is about a man who thinks he can take whatever he wants without consequences. You didn't bring trouble to my door. He did. And stopping him isn't just about protecting you or your family. It's about standing up to the kind of corruption that destroys communities. But your ranch, the ranch will survive or it won't. But I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror, knowing I did the right thing. Can you understand that? That some things matter more than survival? She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw the exact moment her control cracked, saw the fear she'd been holding back, the vulnerability she never showed, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, things could actually work out. I understand, she whispered. But Caleb, if something happens to you because of me, then it happens. But we're not there yet. We're still fighting, and we're going to win. He didn't plan to kiss her. It wasn't strategic, wasn't carefully considered. But she was standing so close, looking at him with such raw emotion, and the weeks of restraint suddenly seemed pointless in the face of everything they were fighting for. So he kissed her, and she kissed him back. It was brief, almost chaste, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been refusing to acknowledge. The growing connection, the unspoken feelings, the recognition that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about employment and started being about something infinitely more complicated. When they broke apart, Lydia's eyes were wide with shock and something else, something that looked like relief, as if she'd been waiting for permission to feel what she'd been feeling all along. Caleb, I know, wrong timing, complicated situation, every reason this is a bad idea. He smiled, tired but genuine. But I'm done pretending I only see you as an employee. I'm done pretending that watching you build a life here hasn't made me want things I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. She touched his face, gentle and careful, like she was handling something precious. After, she said, echoing their earlier promise. When this is over, when Caldwell is dealt with and my family is safe, then we figure out what this is. Is that a promise? It's a promise. They stood that way for a long moment, holding on to each other in the quiet of his office, drawing strength from the contact. Then Lydia pulled away, composure returning like armor sliding back into place. Eat your dinner, she said, gesturing at the plate. And get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. Why tomorrow? Because Chen sent a telegram while you were out. He's ready. He wants to meet with all the witnesses and file the formal complaint by the end of the week. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This was it. The point of no return. Once they filed those charges, Caldwell would know everything, and he would retaliate with everything he had. Then I guess I'd better be rested, Caleb said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel.
Lydia left, and Caleb stood alone in his office, tasting her kiss on his lips, and feeling the weight of what was coming settle across his shoulders like a mantle. He'd started this to protect her, but somewhere along the way, it had become about so much more. It had become about the kind of man he wanted to be. The day the charges were filed, Evan Caldwell came to the Turner Ranch. He arrived with 4 men, all armed, all carrying themselves with the particular arrogance of hired muscle. But it wasn't the show of force that worried Caleb. It was the cold calculation in Caldwell's eyes as he surveyed the property. "Turner," Caldwell said, dismounting with practiced ease, "we need to talk." Caleb had been expecting this. He'd prepared for it. But actually facing Caldwell on his own property, with Lydia in the cookhouse and his men scattered across the ranch, made the danger feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. Talk about what? Caleb kept his voice neutral, aware that Marcus and Henderson had appeared from the barn, their rifles held casually but their intentions clear. "About a very foolish thing you've done, filing charges against me, convincing good people to lie about my business practices. That kind of behavior has consequences, Turner. The only lies are the ones you've been telling to steal people's land." Caldwell's smile was cold. "I've stolen nothing. Every property I own was acquired legally, through proper channels. You can't prove otherwise. We have witnesses, documentation, a pattern of intimidation that a competent lawyer will tear apart in 5 minutes." Caldwell stepped closer, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. "You're a small rancher with a struggling operation. I'm a businessman with resources you can't imagine. You think your little crusade will succeed? You think federal prosecutors care about some ranch families in the middle of nowhere? I think they care about corruption, about a man who uses his money to circumvent the law. The law is whatever I need it to be." Caldwell glanced toward the cookhouse, where Lydia had appeared in the doorway. "Tell her to come out here." "No, I'm not asking, Turner. She's at the center of this mess. It's time we settled things directly. She doesn't want to talk to you. She doesn't have a choice." Caldwell's hand moved to the gun at his hip, not drawing it, just resting there as a reminder. "You've made this personal by involving yourself in my business. Now I'm making it personal. Call her out here, or my men will go get her." The threat was explicit. Caleb felt rage rise in his throat, hot and immediate, but he forced it down. Rage wouldn't help. Strategy would. "Lydia," he called, not taking his eyes off Caldwell. "Stay inside. Lock the door." He heard her hesitate, then the sound of the door closing, the lock clicking into place. Caldwell's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake was you coming here and threatening people on my property." Caleb's voice was steel. "You want to fight this in court? Fine. We'll fight it in court. But you come here again, you threaten my people again, and you'll learn what it means to push a desperate man too far." For a long moment, Caldwell just stared at him, assessing. Then he laughed, that same humorless sound from before. "Desperate. Yes, I can see that. You know what desperate men do, Turner? They make bad decisions. They sacrifice everything for principles that don't matter, and then they lose everything anyway." He remounted his horse, looked down at Caleb with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been laced with contempt. "I've destroyed bigger men than you for less offense. Your ranch will fail. Your reputation will be ruined. And when you're broken and homeless, remember that I gave you a chance to walk away." "I'll remember that when you're in prison." Caldwell's smile vanished. "We'll see." He rode off with his men, leaving a tension in the air that felt like the calm before a tornado. Marcus came to stand beside Caleb, his weathered face grim. "Boss, that was stupid, reckless. Yeah, I know. I was going to say brave, but also stupid and reckless." Lydia emerged from the cookhouse, her face pale, but her jaw set. "He's going to come after you now. Come after the ranch." "Let him try." But even as Caleb said it, he knew the fight had just escalated to a level he might not be prepared for. Caldwell wasn't just powerful, he was ruthless, and men like that didn't lose gracefully. That night, the first disaster struck. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Marcus shouting. He stumbled from his bed, pulled on pants, and ran outside to find the barn engulfed in flames. The men were already fighting it, forming a bucket line from the well, but the fire had taken hold too quickly, burned too hot. All they could do was keep it from spreading to other buildings and try to get the horses out. Caleb plunged into the smoke, found his best mare screaming in terror, got her out with singed eyebrows and lungs that felt like they were burning. Henderson saved 3 more. But 2 horses didn't make it, and by dawn the barn was nothing but smoking ruins. They stood in the gray morning light, covered in soot and ash, staring at the destruction. A year's worth of hay, tools, equipment, gone. Accident? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. No accident, Caleb pointed at the remains of the door. Someone barred it from the outside. Wanted to make sure the horses couldn't get out. This was deliberate. The men's faces went hard with anger. These were frontier men, used to hardship and danger, but there was a code. You didn't target a man's livestock. You didn't destroy his livelihood while he slept. Caldwell, Dutch said, spitting the name like a curse. Can you prove it? Henderson asked. Caleb couldn't. That was the problem. Caldwell would have alibis, explanations. His men would never talk, and the local law wouldn't investigate even if Caleb reported it. He turned to find Lydia standing on the cookhouse porch, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with horror and guilt. This is because of me, she said when he walked over. He did this because he's a criminal who thinks intimidation will make us back down. Caleb kept his voice firm, despite the exhaustion and fear churning in his gut. Don't give him that power. Don't let him make you believe this is your fault. But if I just went back to Colorado, talked to my parents, no. The word came out harder than he intended. That's exactly what he wants. He wants you feeling guilty enough to give in. But Lydia, if you do that, if you let him win through fear, then he wins everywhere. Every family he's hurt, every person he's intimidated, they all lose because you showed him that terror works. She looked at him with eyes that held too much pain. I can't let you lose everything because of me. You're not. He is. Don't confuse the two. Robert Chen arrived the next afternoon, bringing news that was both good and terrifying. The federal prosecutor was interested, more than interested, impressed by the documentation, the witness testimonies, the pattern they'd established. There would be a formal investigation. Charges would likely be filed within the month. But Chen's face was grim as he surveyed the burned barn. He's escalating. That's actually a good sign legally. Shows consciousness of guilt, desperation. But it's bad for you personally. Caldwell's going to keep applying pressure until something breaks. Then we'd better make sure it's not us that breaks, Caleb said. That night he doubled the watch. Men took turns patrolling the property in pairs, armed and alert. It made everyone nervous, turned the ranch into something resembling an armed camp, but it was necessary. And then, 3 days after the barn fire, Lydia received a telegram that changed everything. Caleb was in what remained of the barn, salvaging what tools could be saved, when he heard her scream. He ran, reaching the main house to find her standing in the parlor, telegram clutched in her shaking hands, her face absolutely white. Lydia, what? My father. The words came out choked. He's been injured, badly. A mining accident on Caldwell's property. They're saying he might not survive. The telegram fell from her fingers. Caleb caught it, read the brief, terrible message. Critical condition. Come immediately. It's not an accident, Lydia said, and her voice had gone cold with a fury Caleb had never heard from her before. He did this, Caldwell did this, because I wouldn't give in, because we filed charges. He hurt my father to make me come back. You don't know that for certain. I know. She looked at him, and the anguish in her eyes was devastating. I know because this is exactly what he threatened, exactly what he said would happen, and I ignored it because I wanted to believe that standing up to him would work. But it didn't work. It just got my father hurt. She moved toward her room, started grabbing belongings with jerky, frantic movements. Lydia, wait. Think about this. There's nothing to think about. My father is dying. I have to go to Colorado. If you go, Caldwell wins. That's what he wants, to isolate you, control the situation, force your family to sell. I don't care what he wants anymore. The words came out as a scream, all her carefully maintained control shattering. I don't care about the fight or the charges or any of it. My father is hurt because of me. Because I tried to be brave and it got him hurt. I have to go. Caleb caught her hands, forced her to stop moving, to look at him. Then I'm going with you. No, you need to stay here, protect the ranch. Marcus can handle the ranch. You're not facing Caldwell alone. Caleb, if you come with me, he'll know we're together. He'll use it against both of us. Let him. I'm not letting you walk into that alone. They stared at each other, and Caleb saw the moment she stopped fighting. The moment she realized she didn't want to face this alone, didn't want to be strong by herself anymore. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They left at dawn the next morning, taking the fastest horses and enough supplies for the 3-day ride to Colorado. Marcus stood in the yard, his weathered face worried but resolute. I'll hold things here, boss. You take care of her, take care of this, and come back. We will. But as Caleb rode out with Lydia beside him, heading toward a confrontation with a man who'd already proven his willingness to destroy anyone in his way, he couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The fight was coming, and this time there would be no turning back. The Colorado landscape emerged from the morning mist like a promise and a threat all at once. 3 days of hard riding had brought them to the edge of Caldwell's territory, where mining operations scarred the earth and the air tasted of metal and smoke. Lydia had grown quieter with each mile, her fear for her father warring with a cold determination that Caleb recognized because he felt it himself. They'd barely spoken during the journey, saving their energy for what lay ahead. But as they crested the final ridge and saw the small farmhouse nestled in the valley below, her childhood home, Lydia finally broke the silence. That's it. That's where I grew up. The property was modest but well maintained despite the visible signs of harassment. Fences mended with mismatched wood, a newer barn replacing the one that had burned, fields that should have been lush showing patches of drought where water had been diverted. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the struggle etched into every acre. It's a good piece of land, he said quietly. It was. Before Caldwell decided he wanted the water rights. Her voice was tight. My father built that house with his own hands. My mother planted every tree you see. They were going to pass it to me someday, let me build my own life here. But then Caldwell came, and everything changed. They rode down slowly, and Caleb noticed immediately that they were being watched. A curtain moved in the farmhouse window. 2 men appeared from the barn, one carrying a rifle with the casual readiness of someone who'd learned to expect trouble. That's my brother Thomas, Lydia said, raising her hand in greeting. And our neighbor, Mr. Patterson. They're probably wondering who you are. What do you want me to tell them? She looked at him, gray eyes reflecting the morning sun. The truth. That you're the man who wouldn't let me face this alone. Thomas Moore was in his early 30s, built like someone who'd spent his life working the land, with his sister's same sharp features and direct gaze. He embraced Lydia the moment she dismounted, holding her tight with the desperation of someone who'd been carrying too much weight alone. Thank heavens you came. I sent the telegram 3 days ago, wasn't sure if it would reach you in time. How is he? Lydia's voice cracked on the question. Alive, barely. The doctor's with him now. Thomas's eyes shifted to Caleb, assessing. And you are? Caleb Turner. I own a ranch in Wyoming where your sister works. Works for or with? The question was pointed, protective. Both, Caleb said simply. She's family now. Your fight is our fight. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then you'd better come inside. There's a lot you need to know and not much time to explain it. The farmhouse interior was clean but worn, showing the same signs of struggle as the land outside. Lydia's mother, Grace Moore, met them in the hallway, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes made hard by circumstance and fear. She pulled Lydia into an embrace that lasted several heartbeats too long. He's been asking for you, Grace said when she finally released her daughter. But Lydia, you need to prepare yourself. He doesn't look like himself. They climbed the stairs to a small bedroom where the doctor, an older man with tired eyes, was checking bandages on a figure that barely resembled a living person. William Moore lay unconscious, his face bruised beyond recognition, his chest wrapped in so many bandages that Caleb couldn't tell where the injuries ended. One leg was splinted, elevated on pillows. The smell of carbolic acid and blood filled the room. Lydia made a sound like someone had punched her in the stomach. She moved to her father's bedside, took his hand with infinite gentleness. Papa?
she whispered. I'm here. I'm here now. The doctor looked up, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes betraying his doubt. Miss Moore, I'm Dr. Harrison. Your father's injuries are extensive. Broken ribs, punctured lung, shattered femur, significant head trauma. He's stable for now, but the next 48 hours are critical. Will he survive? Caleb asked the question Lydia couldn't voice. I don't know. I've done everything I can, but some of this is beyond medicine. He's strong, but he's also 56 years old and has endured significant trauma. It could go either way. Lydia's hand tightened on her father's. What happened? The telegram just said mining accident. Thomas spoke from the doorway, his voice hard with barely controlled rage. He was at Caldwell's main operation, the Silver Creek mine. Papa had gone there to confront Caldwell directly, to tell him that no matter what pressure he applied, we weren't selling. According to witnesses, he was walking near one of the mine shafts when scaffolding collapsed. Buried him under timber and rock for 20 minutes before they dug him out. Scaffolding that was inspected and certified safe 2 days prior, Grace added bitterly. Scaffolding that had no reason to collapse unless someone wanted it to. Caleb felt cold fury settle in his chest. Did anyone investigate? The sheriff came, took a report, called it an unfortunate accident, said Papa shouldn't have been on mining property in the first place, that he was trespassing. He wasn't trespassing, Thomas said. The main office is open to the public. Papa had every right to be there. But try telling that to Sheriff Morrison, who's been in Caldwell's pocket for years. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Caldwell had engineered this, timed it perfectly to Lydia's absence, made it look accidental while sending an unmistakable message. Comply or face consequences. Where is Caldwell now? Caleb asked. At his estate, probably. About 10 miles north of here. Why? Because I'm going to have a conversation with him. Caleb, no. Lydia looked up, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. That's exactly what he wants. To get you angry enough to do something reckless, something he can use against you. She's right, Thomas said. Caldwell's been wanting an excuse to escalate things. You go there making threats, he'll have you arrested or worse. We can't fight him that way. Then how do we fight him? The question came out rawer than Caleb intended. He's already destroyed your barn, diverted your water, hurt your father. What's next? What will it take before someone stops him? The room fell silent, everyone knowing the answer but no one wanting to say it. Men like Caldwell rarely faced justice through conventional means because they controlled those means. The law, the courts, the very mechanisms designed to protect people had been corrupted. Grace spoke quietly, her hand resting on her husband's shoulder. We've been considering selling. Not because we want to, but because we can't keep living like this. The fear, the constant attacks, watching William nearly die, it's too much. Mama, no. Lydia stood abruptly. That's exactly what Caldwell wants. If we sell now, he wins. Every family he's terrorized, every person he's hurt, it all becomes worthless if we give in. But if we don't sell, he'll kill your father. Maybe he'll kill all of us. Grace's voice broke. I'm tired, Lydia. We're all tired. Maybe survival is more important than pride. It's not about pride. It's about not letting evil win through fear. Thomas moved into the room, positioned himself between his mother and sister. We're not making any decisions while Papa's unconscious. When he wakes up, if he wakes up, we'll discuss it as a family. Until then, we focus on keeping him alive. It was the voice of reason, but Caleb could see the defeat in Thomas's eyes. Could see that he'd already mentally surrendered, was just waiting for the formal capitulation. And he couldn't blame him. How long could any family stand against systematic destruction? The answer came from an unexpected source. William Moore's eyes fluttered open. It happened so suddenly that everyone froze. One moment he was unconscious, barely breathing. The next, his blue eyes were open, unfocused, but aware, searching the faces around him, until they landed on Lydia. Lydia. The word was barely audible, forced through damaged lungs and broken ribs. You came. She was at his side instantly, careful not to jostle him. Of course I came, Papa. I'll always come. No. He tried to shake his head, winced at the pain. Dangerous. Caldwell, he wants... I know what he wants. Don't try to talk. You need to rest. but William's hand found hers with surprising strength. Listen, important. Each word cost him, but he forced them out anyway. Documents, bank box, Cheyenne, evidence. Papa, what are you talking about? Papers, proving fraud, bribery, falsified claims. William's breathing was labored, but his eyes had cleared, focusing with an intensity that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. Stole them from Caldwell's office. Before accident. The room went absolutely still. Thomas stepped forward. Papa, are you saying you have evidence of Caldwell's illegal activities? Not me. Bank box. Cheyenne National. My name. Box 217. William's eyes found Caleb. You? Who? Caleb Turner, sir. I care about your daughter very much. Something that might have been a smile crossed William's damaged face. Good. Need good man. Papers. Take them. To prosecutor. Federal. Not local. Promise. I promise, Caleb said without hesitation. But right now you need to focus on healing. We'll handle the rest. No time. He knows. About papers. Why? Accident happened. Trying to kill me. Before I could tell anyone. William's hand tightened on Lydia's. Daughter. My brave daughter. Don't give up. Don't let him win. Papa, please, you need to save your strength. Already dead man. Maybe. But those papers, they can stop him. Stop. All of it. His eyes drifted closed, the effort of speaking clearly exhausting him beyond measure. Promise, both, of you. We promise, Lydia said, her voice breaking. We promise, Papa. Just stay with us. Please stay with us. But William had slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. Dr. Harrison moved in immediately, checking vitals, adjusting bandages. That was remarkable, the doctor said quietly. He shouldn't have been able to regain consciousness at all with that level of head trauma.
Must have been something important driving him. It was, Caleb said, his mind already racing. Dr. Harrison, can he be moved? Absolutely not. Moving him now would likely kill him. Then we need to protect him here. Thomas, do you have men you trust? People who can watch the house, make sure Caldwell doesn't send anyone to finish what they started. Thomas nodded slowly. Patterson and his sons, the Weber family down the valley. They've all been hurt by Caldwell. They'll help. Good. Set up a watch rotation. No one comes near this house who isn't family or the doctor. If Caldwell or any of his men show up, you send word to the marshal in Denver. Not the local sheriff, Denver. And what are you going to do? Grace asked. Caleb looked at Lydia, saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. We're going to Cheyenne. We're getting those documents, and then we're going to end this. The ride to Cheyenne took another day and a half, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. Lydia rode with a focus that bordered on obsessive, barely sleeping, rarely speaking. Caleb recognized the behavior. She was running on fear and fury, the same cocktail of emotions that had driven him for weeks. They reached the territorial capital as the sun set on their second day of travel, exhausted and filthy, but driven by the knowledge that time was running out. If Caldwell suspected the documents existed and William's accident suggested he did, he would be searching for them too. The Cheyenne National Bank was a stolid brick building near the center of town, already closed for the evening. Caleb considered breaking in, dismissed it as too risky, and found a hotel instead where they could wash up and plan. We go first thing in the morning, he said, collapsing onto the single chair in the modest room. Propriety be damned, they were too tired and too pressed for time to worry about separate accommodations. Get the documents, take them directly to Robert Chen. He'll know what to do with them. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. What if they're not enough? What if Caldwell's lawyers find a way around them? Then we find another way. But Lydia, your father risked everything to get these papers. He believed they mattered. We have to trust that. My father is dying because he tried to fight a man who can't be fought. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I've been telling myself that justice exists, that doing the right thing matters. But what if it doesn't?
What if men like Caldwell just win because that's how the world works? Caleb moved to sit beside her, took her hand. Listen to me. I've watched you transform my ranch from a failing operation into something that matters. I've seen you create order from chaos, build community from isolation. You did that by believing that effort and care and doing things right made a difference. Don't lose that belief now.
But my father, your father is a fighter. He's fought Caldwell for years, and even nearly dying didn't stop him. He made sure you knew about those documents because he believes they can change everything. Honor that. Honor him by not giving up. She leaned against him, and Caleb wrapped his arm around her shoulders, feeling the trembling she'd been suppressing for days. They sat that way as night fell over Cheyenne, drawing strength from each other, preparing for whatever morning would bring. Neither of them slept well. Every sound in the hotel corridor made them tense, wondering if Caldwell had tracked them somehow. But dawn came without incident, and they were waiting outside the bank when it opened. The manager, a fussy man named Pemberton, was initially reluctant to open a box without the account holder present. But Lydia produced her father's power of attorney documents, prepared months ago in case of exactly this kind of emergency, and Pemberton relented with obvious nervousness. Box 217 is in our secure vault, if you'll follow me. The vault was everything a frontier bank aspired to be. Heavy doors, combination locks, an air of impenetrable security. Pemberton worked the combination, swung open the massive door, and led them to a wall of small metal boxes. Box 217 was near the bottom. Pemberton used his master key combined with the key Lydia had found in her father's effects, and the small door swung open to reveal a single leather portfolio. "I'll give you privacy," Pemberton said, retreating with obvious relief. Caleb pulled out the portfolio, set it on the small table in the vault. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. This was it. Everything they'd fought for came down to what was inside this folder. Lydia opened it. The documents inside were explosive. Ledgers showing bribes paid to local officials, sheriffs, and judges. Falsified mining claims and water rights deeds. Letters between Caldwell and his lawyers discussing strategies for intimidating families into selling. Witness statements from former employees detailing illegal activities. Financial records proving systematic fraud in land acquisitions. "This is everything," Lydia breathed. "This is everything we need." But there was more. At the bottom of the stack, a letter in William Moore's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his accident. "To whoever finds this," Caleb read aloud. "If you're reading these words, then Evan Caldwell has likely succeeded in silencing me. I've spent 5 years documenting his crimes, waiting for the moment when I had enough evidence to bring him down. I worked in his offices as a bookkeeper before I knew what he was. When I discovered the truth, I started copying records, collecting proof. By the time I realized the danger, it was too late to walk away. So I hid this evidence and prayed that someday someone would be brave enough to use it. Caldwell is not invincible. He's a man who's made mistakes, left a trail, trusted the wrong people. These documents prove it. Take them to the federal prosecutor, not local authorities. They're compromised. Federal. And don't stop until justice is done. For my family. For all the families he's destroyed. For the principle that no man should be above the law. William Moore." Lydia's hands were shaking as Caleb finished reading. He knew. All along he knew this might kill him, but he did it anyway. Because he believed it mattered, and it does. Caleb carefully closed the portfolio. "Let's go find Robert Chen." They left the bank with the documents secured in Caleb's saddlebag, both acutely aware that they were now carrying the most dangerous cargo imaginable. If Caldwell discovered they had this evidence before they could deliver it safely, the consequences would be severe. But they didn't make it 3 blocks before trouble found them. 4 men stepped out from an alley ahead, blocking their path. 4 more appeared behind. Caleb recognized 2 of them from Caldwell's visit to the ranch, hired muscle, the kind of men who did unpleasant work for unpleasant money. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell would like a word with you, both of you." "Tell Mr. Caldwell we're not interested," Caleb said, his hand moving slowly toward the gun at his hip. That wasn't a request. The situation was deteriorating fast. They were outnumbered, in an unfamiliar city, with 8 armed men surrounding them. The morning street was mostly empty. too early for crowds that might provide witnesses or help. But then a voice cut through the tension like a knife.
I wouldn't do that if I were you, gentlemen.
Robert Chen stepped out from a nearby doorway, accompanied by 3 men in federal marshal uniforms. Behind them, more officials were emerging from buildings, surrounding Caldwell's men with professional efficiency. These people are under federal protection, Chen continued, his voice carrying authority that made even Caldwell's hired thugs hesitate. Interfering with them constitutes obstruction of justice and assault on federal witnesses. Unless you'd like to join your employer in facing charges, I suggest you leave. Now. The scarred man's hand twitched toward his gun, then stopped. He was clearly calculating odds, trying to determine if the payday was worth the risk. After a long moment, he stepped back. This isn't over. Actually, Chen said calmly, it is. Walk away while you still can. The 8 men dispersed, melting back into the alleys and side streets. Caleb felt his heart rate slowly returning to normal as the federal marshals maintained their positions until Caldwell's men were completely gone. How did you know? Caleb asked Chen. I didn't. But I've been watching the bank since dawn, waiting for you. Figured if William Moore told you about a bank box, you'd come here first thing. And I also figured Caldwell would be watching the same. Chen's expression was grim with satisfaction. Did you find what you were looking for? Caleb handed him the portfolio. Chen opened it, flipped through the first few pages, and his eyes widened. He read more carefully, his professional composure cracking into something like awe. This is remarkable. This changes everything. He looked up at them. These documents prove systematic corruption on a scale that reaches all the way to territorial government. With this, we can bring charges not just against Caldwell, but against everyone he's bribed or coerced. This is going to shake the whole territory. Can you protect it? Make sure it doesn't disappear like other evidence has? Lydia asked. These documents will be in federal custody within the hour, copies made and distributed to multiple offices. Caldwell can't buy or threaten his way out of this. Not anymore. Chen's smile was fierce. You've done it. You've actually done it. But the triumph felt hollow to Caleb. Yes, they had the evidence. Yes, Caldwell would finally face justice. But William Moore was still lying in a bed 50 miles away, possibly dying. The barn on Caleb's ranch was still destroyed. The families Caldwell had hurt were still hurt. How long until charges are filed? He asked. Days, maybe a week. The prosecutor will want to review everything thoroughly, but with evidence this solid, there's no way he won't act fast. Chen closed the portfolio carefully. You two should stay in Cheyenne until things settle. Caldwell is going to be desperate when he realizes what's happening. We need to get back to Colorado, Lydia said. My father is under protection. I've already arranged for federal marshals to secure your family's property. Caldwell won't be able to touch them now. Chen's expression softened. Miss Moore, you've done your part. More than your part. Let us handle the rest. But Lydia was already shaking her head. I'm not leaving my father while he's fighting for his life. Evidence or no evidence, I need to be there. Chen looked at Caleb, who shrugged. Where she goes, I go. You two are either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Caleb admitted. But we've come this far. We're seeing it through to the end. Chen sighed but didn't argue further. Then at least take an escort. I'll assign 2 marshals to travel with you, and stay alert. Caldwell's going to know something has changed. Men like him always know. They left Cheyenne that afternoon with their federal escort, riding hard for Colorado. The documents were safely in Chen's custody, copies being made, the wheels of justice finally turning. Everything they'd fought for was coming to fruition. But as they rode, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous part was still ahead. Cornered animals were always the most vicious, and Evan Caldwell was definitely cornered now. The question was what he would do about it. They got their answer as they crested the ridge overlooking the Moore family farm. Smoke rose from the valley below. Lydia kicked her horse into a gallop before Caleb could stop her, racing down the slope with reckless speed. He followed, heart pounding, already knowing what they were going to find but praying he was wrong. The farmhouse was intact, thank everything. But the new barn was burning, flames consuming it with the same deliberate intensity as Caleb's barn had burned. Men were fighting the fire. Thomas, Patterson, others from neighboring farms. but it was clearly a losing battle. And standing in the yard, surrounded by a dozen armed men, was Evan Caldwell. He looked calm, almost serene, as if watching someone's livelihood burn was just another day's entertainment. When he saw Lydia and Caleb arriving with their federal escort, his expression shifted to something darker. "Miss Moore, Mr. Turner, how convenient that you've returned. We were just having a discussion about property rights and the consequences of false accusations." One of the federal marshals stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, you're under arrest for—" "I'm under arrest for nothing." Caldwell's voice was cold. "I came here to make a final, generous offer to the Moore family for their property. If an unfortunate accident occurred while I was here, well, accidents happen on farms all the time. Don't they, Sheriff Morrison?" The local sheriff, a portly man with weak eyes, nodded quickly. "That's right, just an accident, tragic, but these things happen." "You're not going to be able to lie your way out of this," Caleb said, dismounting. "We have evidence, documents proving everything you've done. Federal prosecutors are reviewing it right now." For the first time, real emotion crossed Caldwell's face. Surprise, then calculation, then something that looked almost like respect. "So William did manage to steal my records. I'd wondered, spent weeks searching for them, thinking he'd hidden them on this pathetic excuse for a farm." He looked at the burning barn. "Well, I suppose it doesn't matter now. Even if you have documents, they'll take months to process through the legal system. And accidents can happen to anyone, can't they?" It was a threat, clear and unmistakable. Caldwell was saying that even with evidence, even with federal attention, he could still hurt them, could still destroy everything they loved while lawyers argued in distant courtrooms. But he'd miscalculated one thing. He'd underestimated just how tired people were of being afraid. Thomas Moore stepped forward, covered in soot and ash, his face set with determination. "You're done, Caldwell. You're finished here. No one's selling to you. No one's backing down. You can burn every building on this property, and we'll still be standing." One by one, other farmers stepped forward. Patterson and his sons. The Weber family. Neighbors Caleb didn't even know, all joining Thomas in a line of defiance. "You've threatened us, hurt us, destroyed our property," Patterson said. "But you can't destroy all of us, and that's what it would take, because we're not running anymore." Caldwell looked at the growing line of resistance, and for the first time since Caleb had met him, the powerful mining magnate looked uncertain. This wasn't how his intimidation usually worked. People were supposed to break, to give in, to choose survival over principle, but these people had chosen differently. "This is foolish," Caldwell said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "You're all throwing away your futures for pride." "No," Lydia said, stepping forward to stand with her brother. "We're fighting for our futures, our real futures, not the ones you'd leave us with, broken, displaced, robbed of everything we've built. You don't get to take that from us anymore." The federal marshals moved in then, professional and efficient. "Mr. Caldwell, you're coming with us. There are questions that need answering in Cheyenne." "You can't arrest me. I haven't done anything illegal." "The documents say otherwise, and you'll have plenty of time to argue your case in court." The lead marshal's tone made it clear this wasn't a discussion. Caldwell's men looked at each other, trying to determine what to do. But without their boss's orders, without the certainty of his power backing them, they were just hired muscle with no particular loyalty. One by one, they backed down. As the marshals led Caldwell away, he looked back at Lydia with something that might have been admiration in different circumstances. "You're tougher than I thought, Miss Moore. I underestimated you." "You underestimated all of us," she replied. "That was your mistake." They watched the marshals ride away with Caldwell, watched his men disperse, watched the smoke from the barn thin and fade as the fire was finally brought under control. The battle wasn't completely over. There would still be legal proceedings, still be complications and challenges. But the war was won. Caleb found Lydia standing alone near the herb garden behind the damaged farmhouse, staring at the mountains as the sun set. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained, but also somehow lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. "Your father woke up again this afternoon," he said quietly. "Doctor says he's going to survive. It'll be a long recovery, but he'll make it." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "He did it. He actually did it. You all did it. Together." She turned to him then, and in her eyes Caleb saw something he'd been waiting months to see. Peace. Hope. The belief that maybe the world could be fair after all. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home. Back to Wyoming. Back to the ranch." He took her hand. "And we figure out what comes next. Together." "Together," she repeated and smiled. "I like the sound of that." They stood in the twilight, watching the stars emerge over the mountains, knowing that the hardest part was behind them. Whatever came next, and there would be challenges, complications, the normal difficulties of building a life, they would face it the same way they'd faced Caldwell, with courage, with principle, and with each other. The journey back to Wyoming felt different than any ride Caleb had ever taken. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders for months, the fear, the uncertainty, the constant vigilance, had lifted, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging kind that comes from having no other choice, but the real thing, solid and warm and built on actual foundation. Lydia rode beside him in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that came from two people who'd been through fire together and emerged understanding they didn't need words to communicate everything. Her father was healing, slowly but surely. Caldwell was in federal custody, facing charges that even his money and influence couldn't buy his way out of. The documents William Moore had risked everything to secure were working their way through the legal system like dynamite through stone. But every mile closer to the Turner Ranch brought a different kind of tension, the awareness that they'd left things unfinished between them. They'd confessed feelings in desperate moments, kissed in the lamplight of his office, made promises about after. Well, after had arrived, and neither of them seemed quite sure what to do with it. Marcus was waiting in the yard when they rode in, relief washing over his weathered face so visibly that Caleb felt a pang of guilt for the worry he'd caused. "Boss, Miss Moore." Marcus gripped Caleb's hand hard enough to hurt. "Heard some of what happened through the telegraph. Federal marshals came through, asked some questions, seemed satisfied. Said to tell you that Caldwell's not getting out anytime soon." "My father?" Lydia asked, dismounting with the stiffness of someone who'd spent too many days in the saddle. "Got word yesterday. He's conscious and talking. Doctor says he'll make a full recovery given time." The tension that had been Lydia's constant companion visibly drained from her body. She swayed slightly, and Caleb was there instantly, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "When's the last time you slept properly?" he asked quietly. "I don't remember." She laughed, but it came out shaky. "I don't think I've really breathed since we left." "Then breathe now. We're home. We're safe. It's over." Home. The word hung between them, significant in ways neither had fully acknowledged. This was his home, his ranch, but somewhere along the way it had become hers too, in ways that had nothing to do with employment and everything to do with belonging. The men emerged from various buildings, Henderson, Dutch, Billy, the Miller brothers, all wearing expressions of curiosity mixed with genuine relief. They'd held the ranch together in Caleb's absence, kept things running despite the uncertainty, and he felt a wave of gratitude for their loyalty. "Cookhouse has been pretty lonely without you, Miss Moore," Henderson said, his usual gruffness softened by something approaching affection. "Billy tried making biscuits yesterday. We're all still recovering." "Hey, I followed the recipe exactly," Billy protested. "The recipe doesn't say to use salt instead of sugar, you idiot." The familiar banter, the normalcy of it, made Lydia smile properly for the first time in days. "Then I suppose I'd better get back to work before you all starve." But Caleb saw the exhaustion in every line of her body, the way she was holding herself together through sheer will. "Not today. Today you rest. That's an order from your employer." "My employer?" Her eyebrow arched. "I thought we'd moved past that kind of formal arrangement." "We have, but I'm pulling rank anyway. Marcus can organize something for supper. You're going to your room, and you're going to sleep for 12 hours. For a moment he thought she might argue, but then she simply nodded. 12 hours sounds like heaven. She walked to the cookhouse, her steps slow but steady, and Caleb watched her go with feelings he was still learning to name. Relief that she was safe, gratitude that she'd come back, and underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with employment and everything to do with love. He'd hired a cook to save his ranch. Instead, he'd found the person who made survival feel like living. Marcus cleared his throat meaningfully. So, you gonna tell me what happened, or do I have to hear it from telegraph gossip? Caleb turned to find his foreman studying him with those sharp old eyes that saw too much. Let's walk. I'll tell you everything. They toured the ranch as Caleb laid out the whole story. The documents, the confrontation, Caldwell's arrest, the community of farmers finally standing together. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, his expression growing more satisfied with each detail. So it's really over, Marcus said when Caleb finished. Caldwell's going to face justice. Federal charges, multiple counts. Chen says with the evidence we have, he's looking at years in prison, even if his lawyers manage to reduce some charges. And the families he hurt? They're protected now. Federal oversight on all the land transactions, investigations into the bribes and intimidation. It'll take time to sort everything out, but the corruption's been exposed. It can't continue the way it was. They'd reached the ruins of the barn, and Caleb stared at the charred timbers with mixed emotions. The destruction still stung, still represented a setback that would take months to recover from. But it also represented something else. The price of standing up, of refusing to be intimidated. And somehow, that made it bearable. We'll rebuild, Marcus said, following his gaze. Better than before. Already got the boys drawing up plans. Henderson thinks we can have the frame up in 3 weeks if we all work together. 3 weeks? Caleb shook his head in amazement. When did you become an optimist? When you came back alive with Miss Moore beside you and Caldwell in custody. Figured if that could happen, anything's possible. Marcus was quiet for a moment. So what happens now, with her? What do you mean? Boss, don't play dumb with me. I've watched you two dance around each other for months, watched you fall in love with her even though you kept telling yourself it was just professional respect. Watched her fall in love with you even though she tried to keep those walls up. You going to actually do something about it, or are you going to let fear keep you from the best thing that's happened to this ranch? Caleb opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. There was no point in denying what Marcus had clearly seen all along. It's complicated. It's only complicated if you make it complicated. You love her. She loves you. You've already proven you'll fight for each other. The rest is just details. She might want to go back to Colorado. Her family needs her, especially with her father recovering. Her family has her brother and her mother and a whole community of neighbors who've finally learned to stand together. They'll be fine. Marcus fixed him with a look. Stop finding excuses and ask the woman what she wants. You might be surprised by the answer. But Caleb already knew the answer, or at least he hoped he did. He'd seen it in her eyes when she'd called the ranch home. Felt it in the way she'd fit into the rhythm of this place, made it better by being part of it. The question wasn't whether she'd stay. It was whether he had the courage to ask her properly, to offer her not just a job, but a partnership, a future, a life. I'll talk to her, he said finally. Once she's rested. Once we've both had time to process everything that happened. Don't wait too long, boss. Life's short, and the frontier's unpredictable. When you find something worth holding on to, you hold on. That night, Caleb sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch was quiet in that particular way it got after a long day, the kind of peaceful that came from honest work and satisfied exhaustion. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, he could hear the men in the bunkhouse playing cards and arguing good-naturedly about who'd cheated last round. Normal sounds. Home sounds. The cookhouse door opened and Lydia emerged, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. She'd clearly slept. Her face looked less drawn, her movements less stiff. She saw him on the porch and hesitated, as if asking permission, and he gestured to the empty chair beside him. Couldn't sleep anymore? He asked as she settled in. 12 hours turned into 14. I woke up disoriented, not sure where I was for a moment. She pulled the shawl tighter. Then I heard Henderson and Dutch arguing about something ridiculous, and I knew exactly where I was. Home? She looked at him, and in the fading light her gray eyes reflected the sunset. Is it wrong that it feels that way? I've only been here a few months, but this place feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years. It's not wrong, and for what it's worth, this place has felt more like home since you arrived than it ever did before. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade and the first stars emerge. Caleb knew this was the moment, the conversation they'd been avoiding, the question that needed asking. But finding the right words felt impossible when so much depended on getting them exactly right. Lydia spoke first. I got a telegram from Thomas this afternoon. My father's recovery is progressing well. The doctor thinks he'll be able to walk with a cane within a few months. They're planning to rebuild the barn, start over properly, now that Caldwell's threat is gone. That's wonderful news. It is. Thomas also said... She paused, choosing words carefully. He said that with the mining company under investigation, they're discovering Caldwell's water diversions were illegal. The federal government is ordering everything restored to natural flow, which means my parents' land will actually be viable again, profitable even. They're talking about expanding, maybe buying some adjacent property that's coming available. Your family's going to be fine. Caleb kept his voice neutral, even though his heart was hammering. This sounded like she was building to something, and he wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. They are, which means... Lydia turned to face him fully. Which means I need to make a decision about what I want for my future. Here it was, the moment that would determine everything. Your family needs you, Caleb said, even though the words felt like pulling teeth. Colorado is your home. The farm will need help rebuilding, and with your father's recovery... Caleb... She reached over and took his hand, stopping his words. Do you want me to stay? The question was so direct, so characteristically Lydia, that it cut through all his careful defenses and polite deflections. Yes, more than I've wanted anything in a long time. Then why are you giving me reasons to leave? Because I don't want you to feel obligated. You came here for a job, not to get tangled up in my problems, not to fight battles that weren't yours. You've been through so much, and He stopped, forced himself to be as honest as she was. I don't want you to stay out of gratitude or because you think you owe me something. If you stay, I need it to be because you want to, because this is where you want to build your life. Her hand tightened on his. You're an idiot, Caleb Turner. What? You're an idiot if you think gratitude is what I feel when I look at you. If you think obligation is what makes my heart race when you walk into the cookhouse. If you think duty is what made me come back here instead of staying in Colorado with my family. She was smiling now, that rare, genuine smile that transformed her whole face. I'm not staying because of gratitude. I'm staying because I love you. Because somehow, in the middle of fighting for survival and standing up to corruption, I fell completely in love with a stubborn rancher who thinks he has to save everyone alone. The words hit him like a physical force, drove the air from his lungs. You love me. I love you. I have for weeks, probably. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it because I was terrified of what it meant, of risking something else I could lose. Her voice softened. But watching my father nearly die taught me something. Life's too short to avoid risk just because you're afraid. Sometimes you have to be brave enough to reach for happiness, even when there's no guarantee. Caleb stood, pulled her up with him, and took her face in his hands with a gentleness that belied the intensity of his emotions. I love you too. From the moment you walked into that filthy cookhouse and started issuing non-negotiable demands, I think part of me knew. I just fought it because I thought love was a luxury I couldn't afford, that it would make me weak, distracted, vulnerable. And now I know it's the opposite. Loving you made me stronger. Made me willing to fight for something beyond just survival. Made me believe that maybe building a life was more important than just hanging on. He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. Marry me, Lydia. Not because I need a cook or because you need a job, but because I can't imagine building a future that doesn't have you in it. She laughed, and it was the sound of joy unrestrained. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. No romance, no poetry, just practical reasons why we should spend our lives together. Is that a no? That's a yes, you idiot. Of course it's a yes. She pulled him down and kissed him properly, thoroughly, with all the pent-up emotion of months of restraint finally breaking free. When they broke apart, both breathless, she was grinning. But we're telling people you did it properly. Down on one knee, flowery speech, the whole thing. Whatever story you want to tell, Caleb agreed, kissing her again because now he could. Because she'd said yes. Because the impossible had somehow become real. They stood on the porch as full darkness fell, holding each other and making quiet plans for a future that suddenly felt limitless. The ranch work would continue, the cookhouse would remain the heart of the operation, but now it would be theirs together, a true partnership built on respect and trust and love earned through fire. When? She asked eventually. When do you want to do this properly? Whenever you want. Tomorrow if you'd agree to it. She laughed. I need more than a day to prepare. Besides, my family should be here. Your men will want to celebrate. We should do it right. Not elaborate, but meaningful. A month, then. That gives your father time to heal enough to travel. Gives us time to rebuild the barn. We can have the ceremony here, on the ranch. Simple frontier celebration. Perfect. She kissed him again, soft and sweet. Though I should warn you, once we're married, I'm going to have opinions about how this ranch runs. I won't just be managing the cookhouse. I'm counting on it. Half of my best decisions in the last 6 months came from listening to you. Only half? The other half came from Marcus. But don't tell him I admitted that. They talked through the evening, making plans and dreaming aloud about what their life together would look like. Expanding the ranch, building a larger house, maybe starting a family eventually. Normal dreams, the kind that felt extraordinary after months of just trying to survive. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. The barn raising became a community event, with neighboring ranchers arriving to help. Word had spread about Caleb's role in bringing down Caldwell, and suddenly the Turner Ranch had friends it hadn't known existed. Men arrived with timber and tools, offering labor and expertise. Women brought food and organized the work with military efficiency. Henderson directed the construction with surprising skill, having apparently worked barn raisings back east before drifting west. The structure took shape quickly, better designed than the original, with Dutch's carpentry skills evident in every joint and beam. It's beautiful, Lydia said, watching from the cookhouse porch as the frame went up. Stronger than what was there before. That seems to be a theme, Caleb replied, sliding an arm around her waist. Everything that got destroyed is coming back better. She leaned into him, comfortable with the casual affection that had become natural between them. Have you heard from Chen? This morning, trial date's been set for Caldwell. 3 months from now. They want us to testify. Both of us? If you're willing, you don't have to. I'll be there. Her voice was firm. I want to see it through. Want to look him in the eye and show him that we're not broken. That everything he did just made us stronger. The determination in her voice reminded Caleb why he'd fallen in love with her. Lydia Moore faced everything directly, never ran from difficulty, never backed down when she believed in something. She'd transformed his ranch not through elaborate schemes or dramatic gestures, but through steady, consistent excellence and the quiet courage to keep showing up. 2 weeks before the wedding, William and Grace Moore arrived with Thomas and half the farming community from Colorado. William was still gaunt from his injuries, walking with 2 canes and moving carefully, but his eyes were bright and his spirit clearly unbroken. So you're the man who's marrying my daughter, William said, sizing Caleb up with the same direct assessment Lydia employed. If she'll still have me, sir. She'll have you? Girl's got good judgment about people, always has. William's expression softened. Thank you for standing with her when she needed it, for not letting Caldwell win, for giving her a reason to stop running. I think we gave each other reasons to stop running, Caleb said honestly. Your daughter saved this ranch as much as I saved her. Maybe more. William nodded slowly. That's the right answer. You'll do fine. Grace was less reserved, pulling Caleb into an embrace that conveyed years of gratitude words couldn't express. You brought my daughter back to me, back to herself. That's a debt I can never repay. There's no debt, Mrs. Moore. I love her. That's all the reason I needed. The days before the wedding were filled with preparations that transformed the ranch into something almost magical. The men built a simple arch near Lydia's herb garden, decorating it with wildflowers and sage. Tables appeared in the yard, enough to seat 50 people. The cookhouse kitchen became command central, with Grace and Lydia working alongside several neighbor women to prepare food for the celebration. Caleb tried to help and was repeatedly shooed away with instructions to stay out of the kitchen and let us work. So he focused on other preparations, ensuring the guest accommodations were ready, that there was enough feed for all the extra horses, that everything was perfect for the woman who'd made perfection seem effortless. The night before the wedding, Marcus found him in the new barn, ostensibly checking on the horses, but really just trying to calm nerves he hadn't expected to feel. "Cold feet?" Marcus asked, leaning against a stall door. "No, just reflecting. A year ago this ranch was failing. I was failing. And now you've got a thriving operation, men who respect you, neighbors who will help when needed, and tomorrow you're marrying the best woman in the territory. Yeah, things have changed. Do you think I can do this? Be the kind of husband she deserves? Build the kind of life worth having?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Boss, I've watched you grow from a scared kid trying to fill his father's boots into a man who stood up to corruption and won. You've made hard decisions, fought battles you didn't have to fight, and never lost sight of what mattered. If anyone can build a life worth having, it's you. And with Miss Moore beside you, there's nothing you two can't accomplish." The words settled something in Caleb's chest, eased the last lingering doubts. Marcus was right. He and Lydia had already proven they could face anything together. Marriage was just making official what had already become true. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the kind of Wyoming morning that made you believe in possibility. Caleb stood under the flower-covered arch in his best suit, watching guests arrive and settle into the chairs the men had arranged in neat rows. Ranchers and farmers, cowboys and townspeople all gathered to witness something that felt significant beyond just two people joining their lives. When Lydia appeared on her father's arm, walking slowly to accommodate William's canes, Caleb forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple dress in cream-colored silk, nothing elaborate but elegant in its simplicity. Her dark hair was loose for once, falling in waves past her shoulders with wildflowers woven through. She carried a bouquet of sage and prairie flowers, and her gray eyes were luminous with happiness. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The ceremony was brief and meaningful, conducted by a circuit preacher who'd ridden in from Cheyenne. Traditional vows with slight modifications, Lydia insisted on partnership rather than obedience, which surprised no one. Caleb promised to honor her, respect her, and stand beside her through whatever challenges came. She promised the same, her voice steady and sure. When the preacher pronounced them married and Caleb kissed his wife for the first time, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Henderson whistled loud enough to startle the horses. Dutch was openly wiping tears from his weathered face. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be. Food in abundance, drink flowing freely, music from fiddles and guitars, dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Caleb danced with his wife, with Grace Moore, with every woman present who asked. Lydia danced with her father, moving slowly and carefully in deference to his injuries, both of them crying happy tears. "You did good, boss," Henderson said during a break in the music, raising his glass in toast. "Real good." "We all did good," Caleb corrected. "This ranch, this life, it's all of us together. Every man here contributed to making this possible." "True enough. But you and Miss Moore, Mrs. Turner now, you're the heart of it. You showed us what it means to stand for something, to fight for what matters." Henderson's expression turned serious. "We'd follow you anywhere, both of you. You know that, right?" Caleb did know it, and the knowledge humbled him. He'd started out just trying to survive, to keep a failing ranch from complete collapse. But somewhere along the way, he'd built something more than a business. He'd built a community, a family of sorts, bound together by shared struggle and mutual respect. As the evening wore on and guests began filtering away to their accommodations, Caleb found himself alone with Lydia near the herb garden where they'd had so many quiet conversations. She was tired but radiant, leaning against him with comfortable ease. "Happy?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "Happier than I ever thought possible. When I came here 6 months ago, I was running from everything, my past, my problems, my fear. I thought if I could just find a place to hide, to be invisible, maybe I could survive." She turned to face him. "But you didn't let me hide. You saw me, really saw me, even when I tried to keep walls up. And you showed me that survival isn't enough, that life is supposed to be more than just enduring. You showed me the same thing. I was so focused on not losing the ranch that I'd forgotten what I was keeping it for. You reminded me that land and cattle don't mean anything if you don't have people to share them with. They stood in the darkness, holding each other and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere, a coyote called. The wind moved through the sage with its distinctive whisper, normal sounds that now felt like music. "So what do we do now?" Lydia asked softly. "We've fought the battles, won the war. What does the peaceful part look like?" Caleb laughed. "Knowing us? Probably not very peaceful. There's always going to be something, drought or harsh winters, cattle prices fluctuating, equipment breaking down. The frontier doesn't really do peaceful. But we'll face it together. Together. Always." They walked back to the main house, their house now, as the last guests headed to bed and the ranch grew quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, the endless cycle of frontier life. But for tonight, they could simply be husband and wife, partners in every sense, ready to build a future on the foundation they'd fought so hard to establish. Caleb looked back once before entering the house, surveying his land under the starlight. The ranch Marcus had called a failing operation, the place he'd almost lost to desperation and isolation. It looked different now, felt different, not because of any physical changes, though the new barn and other improvements certainly mattered. It was different because of the woman beside him. Because Lydia had walked into his carefully controlled world and shown him that control was less important than connection. That strength came not from standing alone, but from finding someone worthy of standing beside. He'd thought she was just a cook, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. He'd been wrong about everything. She was his partner, his equal, his future. She was the reason the ranch had transformed from mere survival into actual life. She was the heart of everything he'd built and everything he hoped to become. And as they crossed the threshold together, stepping into their shared future with hope and love, and the hard-won wisdom of people who'd faced their fears and won, Caleb understood something fundamental about the frontier, about life, about everything that mattered. The best things weren't found through careful planning or rigid control. They came when you were brave enough to let someone in, strong enough to fight for what mattered, and wise enough to recognize that love wasn't a weakness to be avoided, but the very thing that made survival worth the effort. He'd hired a cook to save his ranch. Instead, he'd found his life's love in the kitchen and discovered that sometimes the best thing you could do was stop trying to control everything and simply let yourself be saved in return. The Turner Ranch would continue to grow and prosper through seasons of plenty and hardship. Caleb and Lydia would face challenges together, build a family, weather storms, both literal and metaphorical. Years later, when people asked about the ranch's success, they would point to many factors: good land, hard work, smart decisions. But those who really knew, who'd been there from the beginning, understood the truth. The Turner Ranch succeeded because it became a home. And it became a home the day Lydia Moore walked into a filthy cookhouse and decided that chaos was just order waiting to be discovered, that a struggling rancher was a good man waiting to be believed in, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stop running and start building. In the end, it wasn't the land or the cattle or the buildings that mattered most. It was the love that transformed survival into living and made a lonely ranch in the middle of the Wyoming territory feel like the center of the entire world.